Hi there, my name's Aiden, and welcome to the Skyfall F1 podcast. Today's episode is going to be covering my Drivers' Championship predictions for the 2025 Formula One season. So, this is actually my second attempt at this kind of ranking. I tried to make one prior to preseason testing, and then when testing happened, I realized my predictions about the pace of the cars may be a little bit different than what I had initially thought. Entering testing, my impression was that we were going to have four teams, those namely being Ferrari, McLaren, Red Bull, and Mercedes, who were going to be virtually neck and neck in terms of car performance throughout the season. Now we've hit testing and we see McLaren looking very, very fast, Ferrari looking right behind them, but potentially hiding pace, and then Mercedes behind, and Red Bull down in fourth, and Max Verstappen seemingly confident that they are not going to be able to win races with the current form of the car. So, definitely a bit different from the impression that I'd initially received going into this season. So, I figured it would make sense to change my driver predictions around a little bit because if car performance changes, then it's definitely going to affect where some of these guys finish in the Drivers' Championship. So, a couple things to clear up. This is neither a direct car performance ranking nor a driver skill ranking. It's a conglomeration of both. So, I am not saying that I think the champion is the best driver on the grid. I'm not saying that the 20th driver is the worst driver on the grid. Nor am I saying that the guy in the best car is going to win the championship. I think that both of those things are equally important when you look at Formula One. That's what makes it such a beautiful sport. You have to have a fast car, but you also have to have a skilled driver, as we learned last year. You have to have somebody who's going to push your car beyond its limits and go get the wins, go get the championship. So, the other thing I want to talk about, it's very hard for me to project what a rookie is going to do when they have not stepped into F1 machinery. Obviously, we have several drivers coming in who had very good super sub performances, such as Oliver Behrman, and obviously Liam Lawson has driven over a quarter of a season to this point. So some of these guys are easier to look at than others, but looking at Gabriel Bortoleto, looking at Isaac Hadjar, these are guys who have never driven an F1 car in an actual race weekend outside of free practice one. So it's difficult for me to look at them and be like, oh, you're going to be good. You're not going to be good. Because that's just not how it works. Formula 2 does not always directly translate to Formula 1. We've seen that it has translated in the past with guys like George Russell. And we've seen guys like Nick DeVries who perform well in F2 and FE who come into F1 and just bomb completely. Also, Nick DeVries reminds me of another point. Some of these super subs may not be what we first thought they were. De Vries debuted at the Italian Grand Prix in 2022 with Williams and got P9 in a car that really should not have been in the points ever. But then 2023 with AlphaTauri, he didn't score a single point in nearly half a season. So sometimes jumping into a car for three races can give you very different impressions than what the driver's skill is going to actually be. So the other thing I want to mention is driver progression. It's hard to look at a driver from year to year and say this guy is going to get this much better or this guy's going to get this much worse once you reach a certain age. So I can't look at Fernando Alonso and be like, oh, you're going to start regressing right here, right now. It's going to happen because people have been saying that for the last 3 years. Has it happened? No. Same thing with Lewis Hamilton. Guy could start regressing this season. He could have started regressing 2 years ago. We don't really know. Another interesting case is Oscar Piastri, who made huge strides between 2023 and 2024. If he makes similarly large strides between 24 and 25, he's likely world champion material. Is he going to do that? It's very, very hard to predict. So I'm trying my best to look at how these guys are going to improve year over year or regress year over year, but just take some of these rankings with a grain of salt because there hopefully will be a high degree of unpredictability in this F1 season. So with all of that out of the way, let's get to P20 Gabriel Bortoleto. So this is not really Bortoleto's fault. I believe he's hopping into a very, very poor situation with Sauber. Um, I do think he's going to be in the fight with Nico Hulkenberg for P19. Spoiler alert, the Sauber guys are probably going to be P19 and P20. They were the only cars that got slower in testing from 2024 to 2025, actually losing over 4 tenths a second per lap, which is just ridiculous considering how slow their car already was last year. So I don't see them scoring a single point, considering they couldn't even do that in 2024 until Qatar. I just don't see this being a good season, and I don't think Bortoleto is good enough to hop in that car as a rookie and beat a very, very solid veteran in Nico Hulkenberg. And I'm putting Hulkenberg right above him because even Hulk isn't that good. Even Hulk is not going to be able to take a tractor into the points. I mean, we've seen him do it before with some of these cars. Look at the 2023 Haas, which he somehow got into the points pretty regularly, despite it being the 10th best car on the grid out of 10. So he could find a way to sneak one in there on us, but let's be real here. These two are P19 and P20, no matter how you slice it. So above them, it does get a bit more convoluted. I believe from 7 down to 9 in terms of the teams, it's going to be pretty close. Those teams, I think, are going to be Aston Martin, and RB, not in any particular order yet. So in 18th, I have Lance Stroll. Lance Stroll is easily the worst driver out of the 6 drivers for the 3 teams that I mentioned. He has shown us time and time again that he doesn't really deserve a seat in F1. Obviously, his worst moment yet in the 2024 Brazilian Grand Prix when he somehow drove straight into the gravel on the formation lap. Not much more I really need to say there. I don't think Stroll deserves to be an F1. I don't think he's fast enough to compete with anybody in a similar car. I don't think Sauber's car is going to be quick enough to drop him below P18. So right above Stroll, I have Isaac Hadjar. Hadjar is likely going to come into this year and be extremely volatile because that's really all he's been throughout his entire career. Look at his Formula 2 results last year, where he actually led Formula 2 in wins, but he also had several crucial mistakes in DNFs when he needed points to put a gap between himself and Gabriel Bortoleto, and he just couldn't get the job done or he didn't have the pace. I could very well see him go out and just pull out a banger of a race, go finish P5 in one race. But I could also see him DNFing 5 times in a row. Like, it's so hard to look at Hadjar and what he's going to do in F1 because A, we've never seen him in anything other than FP1, as I said earlier. And B, his F2 results weren't particularly inspiring in terms of consistency. So I don't think he's going to be able to compete with not only his teammate, but most of the other drivers on the grid, although I could see him popping off for a few races here and there. So right above him, I have Esteban Ocon, who I believe is going to fall to the second driver role for Haas this season. Haas may struggle with reliability this year, and Ocon isn't exactly a premier driver to begin with. Yes, he's a Grand Prix winner, but he's never been that kind of guy, and he's been solidly outperformed by Pierre Gasly over the 2 seasons they were teammates. So I just don't think he's at the skill level anymore to really compete at any kind of level in that car, and I think Haas is just going to struggle too much for him to put up any kind of fight. Right above him, I have Yuki Tsunoda in P15. I believe that Tsunoda is maybe not the most underrated driver on the grid, but certainly one of the most underrated drivers on the grid. And now he is driving with a chip on his shoulder. He's been passed up now for the Red Bull seat when he was the clear leading candidate to go get it. And Liam Lawson was chosen over him despite Lawson getting beaten by Tsunoda in 2024. I still can't fully explain that decision from Red Bull's point of view, but I do think Yuki's going to come out with something to prove because now he's not going to want to stick at RB for 2026. He's got to go prove he deserves a seat for 2026 somewhere else on the grid, be that at Aston with his partners at Honda, be that literally anywhere else. He's got to prove that he deserves that seat. So now he's going to go out and do his best, and he's going to go get P15, even in a car that probably is going to be the 8th or 9th fastest. I think he's just going to outperform his car enough to get ahead of a guy like Ocon. In P14, I have the lead Haas, or who I believe is going to be the lead Haas driver, in Oliver Behrman. If you're counting Behrman as a rookie, I would consider him the best rookie on the grid, yes, even over a guy like Liam Lawson, because Behrman was consistent in his performances. In his debut, yes, he was driving a Ferrari, but he had some excellent overtakes to get up to P7, and then he proved whoever was doubting him wrong with points performance in Azerbaijan, beating out the experienced Nico Hulkenberg, score P10. I'm honestly looking at this season expecting Behrman to handily beat Ocon. I just believe he's that good, and I believe he's going to be the guy that Ferrari is looking at as their driver once Hamilton retires. So in P13, I have Jack Doohan. Now, Jack Doohan is a bit of an interesting case. There are a lot of rumors around Doohan that he's not going to be in F1 for very long, that he's going to be replaced by Franco Colapinto, who is now reserve driver to Alpine. And yes, Colapinto proved a lot. No, Doohan hasn't so far. So I could definitely see this happening, even if I have my own opinions about Colapinto. Nonetheless, it's pretty likely that Alpine replaces him. So I'm using this more as the Alpine second driver slot. I believe that Alpine's car is probably the fifth fastest on the grid, at the bare minimum, the sixth fastest. So there's only so far that you can fall down the order when you have that quick of a car. So I believe that whoever's in that second seat, be it Doohan, be it Colapinto, is going to finish P13. You may have noticed that I left out one of the drivers from those three teams that I mentioned earlier, and that driver was Fernando Alonso. I have Fernando Alonso finishing P12 in the championship because I believe he's just too good to be counted out at any time. Even with the car just falling apart towards the end of the season at Aston Martin, Fernando Alonso was still putting in the points with regularity, and he's proven time and time again that he can take bad cars and do wonderful things with them. So even if Aston isn't expected to be quick, even if Newey is focused primarily on the 2026 car, I believe Alonso is good enough to drag that thing up to P12 in the championship. Who I don't believe he's going to be able to overtake is Alexander Albon. Now, you may find that surprising given Williams looked very bad last season and Albon hasn't exactly proven he's one of the top drivers on the grid, but Williams seem to have made huge strides over the course of the offseason. They look to be the at least sixth fastest car. Again, I think it's going to be between them and Alpine for fifth. And Carlos Sainz was consistently topping the sheets with his fast laps in Bahrain. So it's going to be very interesting to see how much of that translates to the actual Grand Prix. And I believe Sainz is the lead driver, but I believe Albon is good enough to be a regular point finisher. Ahead of him, I have Carlos Sainz. As I said, I believe he's going to be the lead driver at Williams, and I think it's going to be a very fun battle between him and my P9 finisher, Pierre Gasly. Hot take, Pierre Gasly might be a top five driver on the grid. There are only five guys that I can name that are ahead of him, and one of those, Oscar Piastri, is still debatable. I have only seen a half season's worth of dominant performance from Piastri to a point where I could call him that level of driver right now, and I believe Gasly is better than the other 14 drivers on the grid. I think people are looking at him and be like, "Oh, he's just a midfield driver," and we're not respecting the fact that he's proven time and time again he can do this in a midfield car. 2019 Brazilian Grand Prix, P2 in the Toro Rosso, 2020 Italian Grand Prix, won in an AlphaTauri, and then the podium last year in Brazil, and then a top three in qualifying in Las Vegas before an unfortunate retirement. Gasly has proven he can be there even in a car that shouldn't be there. I think he's going to be the best of the rest, especially if Alpine themselves are the best of the rest. Gasly should run away with P9 unless Williams are faster. That's the only reason I would debate between the two, honestly, because I do believe Sainz is one of the guys that's right there with Gasly. And if Williams' car is faster, then Sainz should finish ahead of Gasly. That's why I think it's going to be a fun battle. It's going to come down to car performance, I think, but it'll definitely be interesting to see two top drivers in midfield cars duking it out for points. So now we hit the point where these are probably going to be the teams that are regularly competing for podiums and wins, or at least we all think so. Yes, Red Bull's pace seemed to have fallen off, but I'm still not ruling them out for the championship fight just yet. I just don't think they're going to be 100% there for the whole season. And with that said, my P8 finisher is Liam Lawson. Lawson, as I've covered in a previous episode, he's got to find a way to break the cycle. Red Bull has brought in Pierre Gasly, they brought in Alex Albon, they've now brought in Sergio Perez. None of the three have been able to match Max Verstappen, and Lawson's been brought in with the least experience of any of them. Gasly had just a season, Albon had just half a season, now Lawson's coming with just a quarter season of experience. So this situation is set up for Liam Lawson to fail, and if he's unable to break that cycle, he could be in for a very long season in that second Red Bull seat. In P7, I have Kimi Antonelli. Antonelli comes in with a lot of promise, obviously. P6 in F2 as a rookie last season at just 17 years old. He's won several of the lower Formula series, and he's been pegged by Toto Wolff as the next Max Verstappen. Is he going to be the next Verstappen? I have no idea. It'll be very interesting to see if he comes out the gate swinging in the Mercedes, just like Verstappen did in the Red Bull in 2016. But keep in mind, Verstappen had a year of experience entering that car. Antonelli is coming in with two free practice sessions under his belt. So I just don't see that this is going to be that good of a situation for Antonelli to come into. I expect to see him put in some good performances, but I don't expect any kind of consistency to challenge for a top 5 spot. So ahead of him, I have, and this may come as a surprise to some of you, Lewis Hamilton. Lewis Hamilton has yet to prove to me that he can be solid in ground effect machinery. He got outperformed by George Russell in his first year in Mercedes in 2022. In 2023, he barely outperformed Russell simply because of an unfortunate DNF in Singapore. And in 2024, just last season, he lost to Russell again. So in a 3-year span, he got outdueled twice by a teammate that theoretically was the second driver in the team, not very becoming of a 7-time world champion. So I just don't believe that Hamilton has that ground effect machinery completely down. Either that or age is becoming a factor for him. Either way, I don't think he's the lead driver in Ferrari. Moreover, I think that there are better drivers in other cars that are going to outcompete him over the course of the entire season. One of those drivers I have right ahead of him is his former teammate, George Russell. So Mercedes seems to be in a bit of a similar situation to last year, where they're going to struggle for pace in a lot of races, at least in terms of fighting for wins. But in some places, such as Las Vegas, such as Canada, the places where it's generally going to be colder on race day, I think they're going to go out and blow the rest of the teams out of the water. They struggled a lot with engine cooling problems last year, and that held them back. If they continue to struggle with that, but keep the pace that they had in the colder races, then they're going to be just fine. And Russell himself is probably going to pick up a couple wins, but he's not going to be near consistent enough at the top of the podium to compete for the championship. Right ahead of him, and this pains me to say because of my first prediction, I had him as the champion, Max Verstappen. I don't believe that the Red Bull car is going to be where it needs to be for a championship run. Verstappen himself clearly doesn't believe it either. So even though this guy is the master of overperforming his machinery, just as we saw last year when he won the championship in the third fastest car, I don't see him being able to fight for the championship. And I think McLaren and Ferrari over the course of the season are going to have enough of a gap to Red Bull to prevent Verstappen from putting up a challenge. Although I think it's going to take a bit for him to be counted out. I think he'll probably have at least a championship bid until like maybe the final 5 races or so before it finally settles down to the final 3 drivers. And man, this is hard between the final 3 drivers. These 3 guys are so good. One of them isn't just in his third F1 season, but he made such big strides in 2024, and a lot of people seem to think that he's the best driver in his team now. I'm not one of those people, but it remains to be seen. Another guy, Il Predestinato, supposed to bring Ferrari to the promised land, is this year that he finally does it. The last guy may have had his shot at the championship last season. Is he going to get it this year with the experience that he got from battling a 4-time world champion in 2024? In third place, I have Oscar Piastri. He made huge strides last season, but I truly believe Lando Norris is still the team leader at McLaren. Do I think Piastri is good? Yes. Do I think he's going to win races? Yes. Do I think he's going to be the guy for them when it comes to fighting for the championship? I do not. I just think Norris is just enough better where he's going to hold off Piastri throughout the season. And again, we're talking like 10-point difference at the end of the season. That's how close I think this is going to come down for some of these guys. I'm very intrigued to see what we actually end up with in terms of the final point differentials between the top 3 drivers because I truly believe it could come down to Abu Dhabi for between all 3 of these guys. So now it comes down to the final 2 drivers on the list, Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc. And in P2, I have Charles Leclerc. Charles Leclerc is the best of the 2 Ferrari drivers, but I believe McLaren's pace is just enough better where he's not going to be able to win the championship. I do think he's a strong enough driver where he's going to be able to outperform Oscar Piastri over the course of the season. I could definitely understand an argument where you think out of these 3 guys, he's the best driver, and I would agree with that argument. But I think McLaren's going to be fast enough where he's going to be unable to fully go get the championship. Finally, that leaves my prediction for the Drivers' Champion, Lando Norris. Norris gained some useful experience in his battles with Verstappen, as did his team McLaren, and I believe he now has the edge he needs to win his first championship. So, with that said, thank you for listening along with me. Be sure to check out any future episodes. I've got another episode coming out in just a few days, and we're just a week away from the start of the Formula One season. Be sure to listen along to my Grand Prix review sessions on Sunday evenings following the races. Thank you for listening. See you next time.